The eyes of Hugo Chavez looking over Caracas. But now he's dead. And the poor living there in the barrios, historically his political base, have turned against the movement he created.
Bread, medicine, toilet paper. These are just some of the basic necessities Venezuelans are struggling to find. The falling global oil prices have hit the country hard. Public services are disappearing one after the other. American officials are warning the country is on the brink of collapse.
Venezuela is in a state of emergency right now. Its currency has been devalued 92% since the last 2 years alone.
The amount of hyperinflation here is actually just unbelievable. You need a backpack full of money to buy a dinner.
Venezuela bet everything on the price of oil remaining high. And with government revenue 95% dependent on it, the plunge in oil has sent the economy reeling. As a result, GDP is predicted to contract 5.8% in 2016, the third straight year of negative growth. And Venezuela has the world's largest inflation rate, the IMF expecting it to reach 700% this year.
There were poverty reduction programs that were very much tied to political loyalty. They were not set up to be sustainable.
It started with a theory that capitalism is bad, a theory that private property and a division of labor is bad. One of the first things Hugo Chavez did was seize the land. He seized over 1,000 industrial enterprises, nationalizing them. He took over the energy grid. He took over the production of oil, which is today the only way that Venezuela generates revenue.
Now that oil prices are down and the government did not have the provision to save for rainy days, now Venezuelans are left with nothing in a country that only produces oil, that imports everything.
Venezuela could grow most of its own food thanks to large expansion of fertile land. But through the years, most of its agriculture has been abandoned, and other farms like this one have been expropriated by the government, and production has collapsed.
The government just lost control of the situation.
Last week, you'll remember President Nicolas Maduro had to hike petrol prices by 6,000%. So with all this, fears are growing that Venezuela soon won't be able to afford its debt repayments. In fact, bonds are already trading at levels that suggest a default is priced in.
Venezuelans in Caracas, the capital city, we have a very tough time accessing basic necessities, but the people in the interior of the country, in the states, in the province, have it even worse. And we're not just talking about medicine. We're not just talking about basic things such as toilet paper. We're talking about food, and that's where the situation escalates.
Lines down the block for just basic necessities, line down the blocks for public transportation that is insufficient, and then a lot of people talk about the toilet paper with the government setting up a set price so poor people could afford toilet paper.
Even in the driving rain, Venezuelans started their day in search of food, expecting to see the usual grim queues that form at government stores. Not today. The only stores with affordable food are shut. Closed for the National Workers' Holiday, the sign explains. It says sorry and thank you. People walked away empty-handed but full of dread, wondering where their next meal might come from. And here's the thing. These people aren't allowed to come back tomorrow. Food is rationed here, doled out according to the last number on your government ID. Carlos Chirinos explains his turn is today. His number is 5.
Cinco. Hoy me toca a mí. Cinco. Hoy y el miércoles.
El miércoles. So he's saying that just today and Wednesday can he buy things, and because it's closed today, he's out of luck.
The things that we have experienced, the things that we have seen here in Venezuela are absolutely insane.
We went to some of the restaurants, and all the prices on the menu are in paper, and they taped onto the menu because they have to change it every week, and sometimes even more than that. It's changing that fast. It's really it's interesting, and you brought up the gun-free zones. That's the most interesting part to me is no one is allowed to have a gun, and this is the murder capital of the world. So we walk into the hotel at night because we're a little crazy. We're told by everyone, don't go out, and we went out. There was no one anywhere. It was like a ghost town. And when we get back, the security guard is hiding behind a door because he doesn't have a gun, and the bad people all have guns.
The situation in Venezuela is dire, and it is dire in many different ways, socially, politically, as well as economically.
Irma is a mother on the verge of a nervous breakdown.
That's the result of 5 days without water. This is how we live now as Venezuelans. We've lost our quality of life. As you can see, we were middle-class people, and now we're not even that anymore. Just look at the kitchen. This is how we live now that we have no water. Now it's just arrived, so I've started the washing machine, and I'm filling buckets so that I can cook.
Water and electricity are both being rationed. Everyone is feeling the pinch.
Until last year, working 4 jobs, I earned about $300 a month. This year, working the same 4 jobs, I only make $100, and this will keep diminishing as our currency devalues.
Ephraim is a trauma surgeon working in Caracas's public hospitals. Free healthcare was one of the foundations of the Chavist regime.
These are all the bandages we've got, 6 little rolls. And these here are made in China, very poor quality. It tears your skin off.
We've seen food shortages, medicine shortages, now basic services, electricity, even water, that is not reaching a big portion of Venezuela's population.
This is what buying food looks like in Venezuela. Waiting for hours, hoping that by the time one hands in their allotted number, there'll still be food left. And this is what it feels like.
This is the greatest sadness because I didn't know this Venezuela several years ago. For us, this is something new, something unbelievable, unacceptable. It has no other name but catastrophic.
I left home at 4 in the morning. I went to several places for nothing. All I could buy is a pack of maize flour, no more. This has to stop. The one who needs to leave will leave. We'll kick him out of power.
Basic food supplies are being sold on the black market for 10 or 20 times the price supplied by the government.
Without the black market, the country would crunch to a halt.
At the supermarkets, the queues go down the street.
There is no even coffee. If they can find sugar, they take hot water with sugar in the morning, and they try to eat once at 3 o'clock to be able to sleep until the next day.
So this is a true country in collapse. This is a hyperinflation and socialism reaching its ultimate end.
Government officials say the state of emergency will allow better distribution of resources.
The state of emergency has little to do with the economic situation. It's more to do with how a government that has lost all popular support, how can they control society? When you start asking about the alternative explanations the government has given, what they call an economic war, or the aggression, or the imperialist agenda, it does not poll, it does not even register with Venezuelans. So it's all seen as excuses.
The criminality is brought on by the government as a way to control the people. Like, we were driving by, and our fixer showed us this huge, huge building. And he was like, yeah, this is a building, a skyscraper, that's being run by a criminal organization. There's people squatting in there, and this is where all the kidnapping happens. But you walk around town, and there's government-mandated signs saying gun-free zones everywhere you go, and no smoking signs, while there's massive, incredible crime.
By some estimates, there were nearly 4,000 murders here last year.
You have all these are not only civilians and military and Chavistas in opposition, you also have criminal gangs battling it out. It's a recipe, as we have seen in the Middle East, for chaos.
The criminals here are running around, just doing whatever they want, kidnapping whoever they want, murdering whoever they want with pure impunity. Meanwhile, the government sends in their agents to every business, to every private place, to every public park, to make sure that everyone has mandated signs that say no smoking, no guns, and you can't be racist.
Venezuelans have to place our fingers on fingerprint scanners in order to buy medicine and food. They tell us that there's controls over your ID number. You can only buy on certain days. You can only buy certain quantities of food. So this all boils down to a model, a political and economic control model that has decimated the economic apparatus, that has decimated national production, expropriating businesses, expropriating the producers of food and basic means.
I have called for the armed forces and militia to hold national military exercises to prepare us for any scenario.
Yes, while his citizens are starving, Maduro decided now would be a great time to spend money on the biggest military exercise in Venezuelan history.
The military has become the main basis, the main pillar of support of the Chavismo regime. That is very important for everyone to know. What we're seeing, even though Mr. Maduro is a civilian, is basically a military government.
From my experiences here, this government here is run by criminals. This is a criminal state.
When we ask the people, yes, the situation is bad now, but how do you see the situation in the next 12 months? The Venezuelans answer, over 62% of Venezuelans answer that it will get worse. And over 60% of Venezuelans blame the government directly for the crisis.
Opinion polls suggest 70% of Venezuelans think President Maduro should step down.
He recently suggested punishing business owners who've ceased operations by jailing them and seizing their factories.
Las plantas que haya parado cualquier pelucón en este país.
An idle factory will be a factory handed over to the people.
The opposition won the majority of seats in the National Assembly last December, but since then nearly all of its decisions have been struck down by the Supreme Court. So now almost 2 million people have signed the opposition's petition to force Maduro out of office.
The question right now to point out is that we all know that President Maduro is not going to finish his term. There is no way under the circumstances that President Maduro is going to finish.
He's not going to go quietly. As a matter of fact, what we've seen since the December 6 elections, where the opposition won the National Assembly in a landslide victory, is the whole state, not only the executive power, not only the president, but also the Supreme Tribunal, also the armed forces, closing ranks with the president in setting up obstacles to that political change that Venezuelans expressed as their will.
If you, the government, block the democratic route, we don't know what could happen in this country, says Enrique Capriles, opposition leader in Venezuela. Venezuela is a bomb that could explode at any moment.
Where is this country headed, and can this crisis be resolved in a peaceful manner?
Well, I doubt it, because we have reached the peak of the tensions between the government and the opposition. And that's why I don't think there is going to be a peaceful solution unless the government led the democratic mechanism, like the recall referendum, in order to try to bring some changes in the country. So, and I don't see, because the government is trying to delay all the process, the democratic process, and trying to use some force.
Venezuela's capital, Caracas. We've come to a street market in the poor part of town, filming with a hidden camera. Everyone around us is part of a new black market. They're reselling basic household goods, a practice banned by the government to stave off inflation. All of these products are nearly impossible to find on shop shelves.
Are you selling this toothpaste?
You want to buy it?
Yes.
We're searching for something very rare, sugar. How much for this pack of sugar?
2,700 bolivars.
This is the only bag we found in the whole market. Do you have any other packs?
No, it's the only one I have.
To buy this small bag, we hand over a stack of high-value banknotes. More than 10% of the minimum monthly wage. A few years ago, Venezuela was exporting sugar. Now, even the soda companies here can't find any. All the soft drinks bear the same strapline. No calories.
All the soft drink producers have redesigned their packaging to show that this isn't the original product.
What is it that brought a former powerhouse of Latin America to the verge of starvation? To find out, we drive 6 hours to Venezuela's Lara state, which used to be the main sugar-producing area of the country.
All this is cane that was never harvested. It's dry, there's no juice, there's nothing.
Reynaldo worked for the Pio Tamayo Sugar Company for 17 years. He was fired 2 years ago after denouncing corruption by civil servants in the company's administration.
This all used to be full of sugar cane. And a few years ago, they stopped producing cane. And the same thing happened in all the ranches here.
Reynaldo started working for the company when it was still private. Then, under Chavez, it was nationalized.
At first, things went well. We got good salaries, good benefits. But the policy was bad. The manager that they put in charge of the company, at the very least, needed to be an agricultural engineer who knew what he was doing. But instead they put a university professor in charge of a corporation, producing millions of bolivars.
Now the plant is only used to refine imported sugar.
There were 324 of us workers when it was a private company. When it was nationalized, there were around 800 workers. Too many workers, and that's what bankrupted the company.
Reynaldo and his family now get by driving motorbike taxis. His 2 elder sons were studying degrees in finance and administration, but they've abandoned university to focus on earning money, all of it to buy food.
This is today's lunch, a soup that we have prepared, but without arepa patties, because sadly the flour to make arepas costs too much. At the government price it costs around 200 bolivars, but we now have to pay around 2,000 when we can find it.
Reynaldo's family was fiercely pro-Chavez, but after denouncing abuses by local state officials, Reynaldo was fired from the local council. Now he doesn't have access to the subsidized food supplies. In Venezuela, you always pay a high price for criticizing the government.
It's one thing to be for Chavez, but it's another thing to support Maduro. I mean, who supports Maduro?
Some Venezuelans do support their president, Nicolas Maduro. The streets of Caracas are often filled with red flags and T-shirts, and statements disconnected from reality.
What we have here in Venezuela is the best.
So there's no hunger here?
No, there's no hunger. That's a lie.
Look, my love, of course we're self-sufficient because thanks to President Maduro, we're producing food. The state food distribution network is active. We're producing food, you name it. There's corn, there's cereal, there's vegetables. We're producing all of that. Onwards, Maduro, we're with you, and nothing will defeat our comrades.
This vision is echoed in state media. But dig a little deeper and you find people like this man, who works for a state company and is forced to attend pro-government marches.
Okay, we don't have much choice because all of the managers check that we go to the marches. They keep an eye on us. In my department, they keep a register of who goes and who doesn't. They give us red flags and a lunch pack. I'd say around 60% of people in my department are pro-Maduro. Around 40% are against.
But you all have to go to the marches?
We all go to the marches, yes.
Speaking out like this could lose him his job and his access to state food supplies. A threat that sparks widespread fear. Hundreds of people have been waiting all night in front of this state supermarket. The elderly, disabled people, new mothers. Tensions are running high.
And what did the opposition do? Nothing. At least my president does something.
One issue keeps coming up, the recall referendum that could see President Maduro kicked out of power.
We want a referendum.
Are you in favor of a referendum?
I don't know. I really don't know.
Is it difficult to talk here?
I don't want a referendum. I want my president. I want him to stay put. He isn't going anywhere. No one wants a referendum.
Everyone wants a referendum, everybody, because there's no food, there's no medicine. Look at the lines here since 1 in the morning. But there's nothing to buy. I'm not afraid to say it.
Behind the gates, residents of this building want to keep the crowds out and scarce goods for themselves. Selmira will have to wait a few more hours, and even then there's no guarantee she'll be heading home with any food. She and her neighbors have set up an informal exchange, pooling what they managed to find on their shopping trips.
I just swapped something for this oil, which I haven't seen for a long time. It's disappeared from markets, and it's the best oil here, and this is a big deal for me. I haven't been able to cook with oil for ages.
Selmira and her friends are middle-class women experiencing a strange form of poverty. They own their own apartments, they're well-dressed and wear jewellery, but they're undernourished.
When you find milk, it costs 8,000 to 9,000 bolivars. Our pension is 22,000 a month. How do you ever buy milk?
The little we earn goes towards buying food. We never have ice cream or chocolate. We never go to the cinema. Never.
Hunger is Venezuela's biggest emergency, but whilst people forage for food, the country is falling apart. The office of the Tal Cual newspaper looks almost empty. There were 30 investigative journalists working here a year ago. Now there are just 5. The problem, there's simply no paper to print on, a shortage which has hit Venezuela's media hard.
We show in this graphic that the newspapers that have stopped publishing, at first they stopped printing during Carnival and Holy Week, then they just stopped altogether. For example, El Carabobeño, which was one of the biggest newspapers in the country, has stopped printing.
A few months ago, Tal Cual went from weekly to monthly publication, cutting down from 32 to 24 pages. Its small team is fighting for the newspaper's survival.
Paper is imported by the government, which is in charge of its distribution and price. There are restrictions, and everyone is being affected, but we have noticed that there's more paper for state media and less for opposition papers.
In solidly Chavista areas, pro-government newspapers that hail the success of the Bolivarian revolution are handed out for free, even as the country teeters on the brink. People who can leave Venezuela are getting out in droves. The government doesn't release emigration data, but in this Brazilian Cultural Institute, they have an idea of the scale.
Some say 1.2 million, others say 1.6 million Venezuelans have left the country, and most of them are young people with degrees. We're losing all of these talented youngsters who would have educated the next generation.
Rooms here in which young Portuguese teachers once lived are now empty. Last year, 4 teachers from this school flew home, and 6 have left so far this year. Ivan will be next.
You're going back to Brazil, aren't you?
Yes.
It's a natural decision after giving years of service here teaching.
A brilliant student, Ivan had planned to settle here.
When I arrived from Brazil 4 years ago, things were bad, but nothing like they are today. Back then, you could imagine a future. Now we're living just for today and tomorrow. 80% of the students who studied with me at university have left.
Hunger is the biggest concern in Venezuela right now. But other serious problems are emerging, such as crime, jobs, and education. Uncertainty awaits as the sun sets on the failed promises of Chavismo.
Venezuela is out of food, out of medicine, and now running out of gas.
I can't find gas anywhere. There are several gas stations closing due to fuel shortages, and there are long queues. And this is a petrol-producing country. I don't know where this is going.
There's a shortage, a gas shortage. I don't know exactly what is happening because I do not know, but there is no fuel in any of the stations.
Venezuela has the world's largest oil reserves, and for years it's been selling its citizens the world's cheapest gasoline. But the country mainly pumps an extra heavy grade of oil that has to be mixed with lighter crude, which is imported from abroad in order to be refined. Now international suppliers are holding back imports of this lighter crude because of unpaid debt, leaving gas stations in the capital Caracas and several other cities with no supplies. According to Reuters, the gasoline shortage around the country has been made worse by an increase in fuel exports to foreign allies. It's not just gasoline that Venezuela is running out of these days. President Nicolas Maduro is now turning to the United Nations for help to boost the country's drastically low supply of medicine.
I have asked for support from the United Nations to address the economic and social wounds that have hit our people because of the economic war and the fall in oil prices, namely to regulate the whole issue of medicines, because the United Nations has the most advanced and complete plans in the world.
Venezuela is suffering chronic shortages of goods and products from milk and bread to antibiotics, a situation that forces people to spend entire days waiting in long lines at supermarkets. Others buy food on the black market at steep prices. Maduro says the shortages are a result of an economic war waged by the opposition and the business elite. Critics say the government is to blame for persisting with failed policies of price and currency controls. But whatever the reason, drivers are leaving gas stations with empty tanks and empty stomachs. Christine Pirovolakis, TRT World.
These 5 facts explain why Venezuela could be on the brink of collapse. The situation in Venezuela is going from bad to worse. This week, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro repeated his threat to seize closed factories and nationalize them, a bold move considering his popularity numbers are in the tank and the opposition, which won legislative elections late last year, is breathing down his neck. These 5 facts explain what you need to know about Venezuela right now. When we last checked in with Venezuela, the country was already being crippled by shortages. The situation has deteriorated further. Water is now rationed by the government, and some residents have been warned that water will be supplied just once every 21 days after the mainland reservoir dries up. Venezuelans have begun stealing water from swimming pools and tanker trucks to get by. Electricity is limited too, with Maduro ordering public offices open just 2 days a week in a bid to conserve energy. This is in addition to the 4-hour power cuts ordered across the country and the rolling blackouts that have become a part of daily life. Basic medicines like aspirin are nowhere to be found, and supermarket shelves are often empty. In April, another devastating blow: the country's largest private company, Empresas Polar S.A., closed its doors. Empresas makes 80% of all beer consumed in the country, a tough turn of events at a time when Venezuelans could use a drink. New banknotes begin circulating as inflation soars into triple digits. Venezuela. Crisis hit Venezuela introduces 3 new banknotes in response to hyperinflation. As Hemingway would say, Venezuela went bankrupt gradually, then suddenly. For years, the country has been deeply dependent on its vast oil reserves, which account for 96% of export earnings and nearly half its federal budget. That was manageable when oil was selling at more than $100 a barrel. Venezuela has budgeted for oil at $40 per barrel for years now, but instead of saving the surplus when prices were higher, much of this emergency oil fund was either spent or stolen. Venezuela would now need oil prices to reach $121 per barrel to balance its budget. Instead, they're hovering around $50. Damage to Venezuela's economy has been exacerbated by drought. About 65% of the country's electricity is generated by a single hydroelectric dam that's now in serious trouble. For decades, corruption has been a constant in Venezuelan politics. It's the most corrupt country in the Americas, and 9th most corrupt in the world, according to Transparency International. Its murder rate of 90 per 100,000 residents is the second highest in the world, after El Salvador. Not surprisingly, people are angry. There are an average of 17 demonstrations per day across the country, according to the Venezuelan Observatory for Social Conflict. The current unemployment rate is 17%, and the IMF projects it will reach nearly 21% next year. The inflation rate is expected to hit 481% by year's end and 1,642% by next year, according to the IMF. To put that in perspective, in February a McDonald's Happy Meal in Caracas cost $146 at the official exchange rate of 6.3 bolivars per dollar. Legislative elections this past December handed control of Venezuela's parliament to the Democratic Unity Coalition, a political grouping of centrist, center-left, and center-right parties. It was the first time in 17 years that Chavismo, the unique brand of socialist and populist politics spearheaded by the late President Hugo Chavez and continued by Maduro, his chosen successor, failed to win nationwide elections. Maduro's approval rating in December was 22%, today it's 15%. Some 70% of Venezuelans want him removed from office. Populists need popular support, and Maduro's is running out. To that end, the opposition has collected enough signatures to trigger a recall referendum against Maduro. Activists needed 200,000 signatures, 1% of all voters, to kickstart the process. They got 1.85 million. 2 weeks ago they submitted their list to the National Electoral Council, CNE, for approval, but the validators are government loyalists and have been dragging their feet. Why? Timing of the referendum is crucial. According to the Venezuelan constitution, if the president is ousted within the final 2 years of his term, the presidency passes to the sitting vice president, in this case, Aristobulo Isturiz, a loyal Chavista. If that should come to pass, January 10, 2017 is the magic date. The opposition fear is that the Chavista movement will simply sacrifice Maduro to protect Chavismo. And short of a popular uprising intense enough to force the government to move more quickly, that's exactly what will happen. Maduro looks likely to be ousted before his term officially ends. The real question is whether Chavismo will get the boot along with him. Venezuela is suffering the worst economic crisis in its history. Ordinary people in the oil-rich country are regularly going without food. 3/4 empty supermarkets are being ransacked by angry, hungry mobs. The government has declared a state of emergency. Food is now being transported under armed guard, and basic necessities are being rationed. People have to queue for hours and sometimes overnight on their assigned days to receive staples like rice and cooking oil. By IMF figures, it has the world's worst negative growth rate, -8%, and the worst inflation rate, 482%. The unemployment rate is 17% but is expected to climb to near 30% in the coming few years. The shadow of hunger, the desperation of the crowds and the spread of unrest and criminality threaten the government of Nicolas Maduro, 3 years after he was bequeathed power by the dying revolutionary strongman, Hugo Chavez. The opposition has launched a drive to canvass signatures for a petition for him to step down. That will be a difficult task in the face of a state-run electoral system determined to thwart it, but the state may implode even if the recall referendum fails. The Maduro government has blamed the crisis on the U.S. and right-wing business owners who it accuses of cutting production to sabotage the economy, but Maduro has inherited a ruinous state-run system from Chavez to which economists say he has added some damaging mistakes of his own. Chavez built his popularity on oil money and foreign debt, using both to fund consumption, while nationalizing more than 1,200 private companies deemed not to be functioning in the public interest. But in 2015 the oil price was cut in half and Venezuela's reckless public finances helped make it a high-risk debtor, cutting the country's access to international capital. The Maduro government has responded to the consequent hole in public finances by printing money, fueling inflation. It's estimated that the cost of basic groceries that would keep a family going through a week increased by more than 25% between March and April, and now costs 22 times the state minimum salary. The state has tried to ration basic foodstuffs and set their prices, but the consequence is they have simply disappeared from the shops into the black market. The opposition says the direct distribution of food has been politicized by being channeled through local committees run by Maduro's United Socialist Party of Venezuela. According to Transparency International, Venezuela is the 9th most corrupt country in the world. Members of Maduro's family and immediate entourage have been implicated in drug smuggling and hundreds of billions of dollars are believed to have been siphoned out of the economy. The crisis is likely to get even worse in the near future. The government has been running through the country's gold reserves to pay its international debt service and finance at least some basic imports, but those reserves are now dwindling, and Maduro will either have to default or stop importing food. Both options are potentially catastrophic.